I need you to sit with something. In the year 900 AD, while most of Europe was in the middle of the Dark Ages, struggling, fragmented, without running water or organized medicine, there was a civilization in what is now southeastern Nigeria that was casting bronze.
To be precise, radiocarbon dating places the Igbo-Ukwu artifacts between 800 and 1000 CE, the same period historians classify as the European Dark Ages. The temporal overlap is not coincidental. Well, it is instructive.
Not rough bronze, not basic metalwork. Bronze vessels so intricate, so technically extraordinary that when archaeologists first uncovered them in the 1930s, they refused to believe Africans had made them.
They literally could not accept it. Their entire framework said this level of sophistication was not possible without European contact. And they were wrong.
Those people had a complete spiritual system, a supreme creator, a personal divine spark in every human being, an earth goddess who was the ultimate moral authority, and most of their descendants have never been told any of this. Today we are going all the way in, the Igbo spiritual world, what all of West Africa believed before Christianity arrived, how old these traditions were, and the system that was designed to make sure you would never know. This is your history. Let's talk about it.
To understand what was lost, you first have to understand the scale of what existed. And what existed in West Africa before European contact was not a collection of scattered villages waiting to be civilized. It was a network of sophisticated, organized, deeply spiritual civilizations.
Archaeological and anthropological evidence indicates Igbo settlements in southeastern Nigeria dating to at least 5000 BCE. That is 7,000 years of continuous habitation and cultural development before the first European arrived on the Niger coast.
7,000 years. Let that number breathe for a second before we keep going.
The most dramatic proof of this civilization is at a site called Igbo-Ukwu. In 1938, a man named Isaiah Anozie was digging a cistern beside his home in Anambra State, Nigeria, when his shovel hit metal. What he found would change the archaeological understanding of African history forever.
The excavations at Igbo-Ukwu yielded over 700 copper and bronze artifacts, more than 165,000 beads of glass, carnelian, and stone, preserved textiles, ivory, and the remains of an elite burial chamber. Isotope analysis confirmed the metals were sourced locally. There was no European origin, no outside influence. The Igbo produced this themselves.
Scholars at the Metropolitan Museum of Art described the bronzes as among the most inventive and technically accomplished ever made. One art historian compared them to the finest jewelry of Rococo Europe and the work of Fabergé.
9th century Nigeria being compared to the most sophisticated European decorative art. And the Igbo got there first.
It is worth noting that the academic community's initial resistance to these findings was not based on evidence. It was based on assumption. The assumption that Africans could not have produced this quality of work independently. That assumption was incorrect. The evidence required a complete revision of the existing framework.
They were not primitive. They were extraordinary. And they had been that way for a very long time. Now let's talk about the civilization that housed all of this, the Kingdom of Nri. And this one is going to reframe everything you think you know about how power works.
The Kingdom of Nri emerged formally in the 9th century. Its first documented king, Eze Nri Ifikwenem, began his reign in 1043 CE, The kingdom maintained continuous influence across Igbo land until 1912, when British colonial forces compelled its surrender. Duration: approximately 869 years of uninterrupted spiritual and political authority.
Almost 1,000 years. And here is the part that should stop everyone. Nri had no army. The Eze Nri, the priest king, ruled entirely through spiritual authority. No military force, no violent enforcement, just the weight of shared sacred belief.
Communities across Igbo land gave allegiance to Nri not because they fear its weapons, but because they respected its spiritual power. Think about what that means. A civilization that lasted nearly 1,000 years on moral authority alone.
For comparative context, the Roman Empire, which is frequently cited as the benchmark of ancient governance, lasted approximately 500 years in the West. The Kingdom of Nri, operating without military infrastructure, lasted longer.
Luma just said Nri outlasted Rome without an army.
And there is one more thing. The Kingdom of Nri was a sanctuary for escaped slaves. If an enslaved person reached Nri territory, they were to be set free. The same people European colonizers described as needing civilization were already running a civilization that rejected slavery.
The historical record on this point is consistent. The Kingdom of Nri maintained an explicit anti-slavery position within its sphere of influence. This predates the European abolitionist movement by centuries.
Centuries. Before Wilberforce, before Lincoln, the Igbo were already there.
Now we go inside the spiritual world itself. Odinani. The word means the way of the land. It is not just a religion. It is the operating system of Igbo life.
Odinani has no single founding event or prophet. It developed over millennia through lived experience, observation of the natural world, philosophical inquiry, and oral transmission between generations. It is, by definition, the accumulated spiritual intelligence of an entire people across thousands of years.
Chukwu. At the center of Odinani is Chukwu, the supreme creator. The name comes from Chi, meaning spiritual essence, and Ukwu, meaning great. The great spirit, the great Chi.
Chukwu is defined in Igbo theology as omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, the source of all existence, both visible and invisible. Critically, Chukwu is genderless, not coded as male or female. This is a theological position that predates Western feminist theology by thousands of years.
A genderless supreme creator, thousands of years before that was ever a conversation in the West.
And here is the distinction from the Western Christian concept of God. Chukwu does not directly intervene in daily human affairs. Chukwu is the source, the totality, too vast to be accessed directly. You are not separate from Chukwu. You are made of Chukwu. Allah is the earth goddess, the most widely venerated deity in all of Igbo traditional religion. She governs morality, fertility, agriculture, and the resting place of the dead. The earth you walk on is her body.
What is philosophically significant about Allah is her function as the supreme moral authority. Crimes against other persons, murder, injustice, exploitation, are classified as Enso Allah, abominations against the earth herself. This creates an ecological ethics system. Your moral behavior is inseparable from your relationship with the physical world.
Your crimes disturb the earth. That is the law. Not a king's law, not a church's law, the earth's law.
And Allah's messenger on earth is the python, which is why pythons were sacred and never to be harmed in Igbo communities. Killing a python was not just a bad act, it was an offense against Allah herself. Chi. Your chi is your personal divine essence, a fractal of Chukwu living inside you, not a separate deity assigned to watch over you, a piece of the supreme creator that is you in your spiritual dimension.
The theological implication of the chi concept is significant. If every human carries a fragment of the supreme creator, then every human being is, by definition, sacred. Not conditionally, not as a result of behavior or belief, inherently. This is a built-in framework of human dignity that predates any human rights declaration by tens of thousands of years.
Every person is sacred by default. That is the starting position of Igbo theology.
The Ikenga, a carved wooden figure, represented this divine nature in the home. You kept it, made offerings to it, talked to it, because it was a representation of your own divine nature.
The Alusi. Below Chukwu are the Alusi, spiritual forces that govern specific aspects of nature and human experience. Each one an expression of Chukwu manifesting through the natural world.
Amadioha governs thunder, lightning, justice, and truth. Agwu governs divination, healing, and medicine. The Dibia priests and healers operate under Agwu's domain. Njoku-ji governs yam and agriculture. Idemili governs rivers and water. Each Alusi represents a domain of existence treated as spiritually significant and actively governed.
Everything is sacred. Everything is alive. Everything has a governing spiritual intelligence. That is the framework. And then the ancestors, Diamuo, the spirit people. In Odinani, death is not an ending. The dead remain present, active, and watchful in the lives of their descendants.
The Igbo cosmological position on death is one of radical continuity. The boundary between the living and the dead is permeable. Ancestors can intervene in the affairs of the living. They must be honored through libation, prayer, and the preservation of memory. The relationship is ongoing, not historical.
Your dead are not gone. They are watching. They are involved. You carry everyone who came before you.
And one day, you will become an ancestor yourself, still present, still caring, still connected to the people who carry your blood. That is a philosophy of radical continuity. You are not the beginning of your story. You are a link in something that goes back thousands of years. I need to tell you about the Mbari houses because I have studied a lot of spiritual traditions and artistic practices around the world, and nothing has stopped me quite the way this one did.
The Mbari house is a sacred architectural art form practiced by the Aweri Igbo people of what is now Imo State, Nigeria. When a community experienced a crisis, a drought, an epidemic, a war, the priests would determine through divination that Mbari house needed to be built as an offering to Allah.
Specific community members were selected through divination to build it. Not selected for artistic skill, but for spiritual designation. These builders entered ritual seclusion for a period of 1 to 2 years, during which they lived on the construction site and worked continuously.
For 1 to 2 years, they built an open-sided temple filled with life-sized clay sculptures and paintings. Gods, humans, spirits, animals. Allah herself, always present, regal, seated, holding a child. Everything the community sound remarkable, frightening, or worth recording.
Art historian Herbert Cole described Mbari house as a merging of architecture, sculpture, bas-relief, and painting, designed as a major offering to an unseen but ever-present God, the goddess of the very earth upon which people walk.
And then, when it was complete, it was left to decay.
The dissolution of the Mbari house was intentional and theologically prescribed. It was built from anthill clay specifically because that material would eventually dissolve back into the earth. The return of the structure to Allah was not neglect. It was the completion of the offering. The art was surrendered completely.
2 years of an entire community's creative energy, and then you let it go, not to preserve your legacy, as a pure act of giving.
Chinua Achebe named his literary club the Mbari Club after this tradition. He said Mbari was a celebration through art of the world and the life lived in it. Colonialism ended the practice. Mission schools pulled the young people away. The last documented Mbari houses were photographed in the mid-20th century. Most were destroyed during the Biafran War.
What was lost was not categorizable simply as art or religion. It was an integrated system of communal spiritual practice, ecological theology, and creative offering that had no documented equivalent in any other culture on earth. The loss is, by any measure, irreversible.
She said irreversible.
Yeah, she did. Now I want to introduce you to someone, a first-person witness, someone who was there, someone who grew up inside the full living practice of Odinani, was kidnapped into slavery, survived, and wrote it all down.
Olaudah Equiano, born approximately 1745 in Asaka, in what is now Anambra State, Nigeria. His father held a position of political and spiritual authority within the community. Equiano grew up with direct, daily experience of Odinani as a living tradition.
In 1756, when he was 11 years old, Equiano and his sister were kidnapped while the adults of their village were working in the fields. They were sold from village to village for months, moving toward the Atlantic coast. His sister was taken from him along the way.
He arrived at the coast, saw the ocean for the first time, saw the slave ship, and was convinced he was going to be eaten by the white men waiting there. He survived the Middle Passage. He eventually purchased his own freedom. He became an abolitionist in London.
In 1789, he published the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano. It ran through 9 English editions in his lifetime and was translated into Dutch, German, and Russian. It is one of the earliest and most significant slave narratives in the English language.
But most people focus on the slavery part. The first part, the part about home, is what matters for this conversation.
Equiano described his Igbo community in detail, their government, their customs, their spiritual life. He wrote that his people believed in a creator of all things who governed events, a supreme being, a moral universe. He was writing in 1789 for a European audience that had been told Africans were heathens. And he was saying, we already had God. You just didn't recognize what you were looking at.
Equiano's account is significant not only as testimony, but as documentation. It provides a first-person description of Igbo spiritual life before full-scale British colonization. It confirms that what we have described today as Odinani was a living, active, coherent tradition within living memory of the colonial period.
His name was Olaudah Equiano. He was 11 years old when he was taken. He remembered everything, and he wrote it down.
Now let's zoom out. The Igbo were not alone. The entire West African region had sophisticated spiritual traditions, and they all shared foundational ideas that tell us something important about what African people understood about the divine before any outside religion arrived.
I will provide the documented estimates. Ifa, the Yoruba spiritual tradition, oral tradition, and some scholarly analysis suggest origins of 8,000 years or older. Vodun, the Fon and Ewe tradition of the Dahomey region, estimated at 6,000 years. Akan religion of Ghana, ancient, rooted in oral tradition, pre-colonial by multiple millennia. Christianity, approximately 2,000 years old. The arithmetic is straightforward.
The arithmetic is straightforward.
Ifa, at the center, is Olodumare, the supreme creator, genderless, the source of all things. Then the Orisha, spiritual forces, each governing a domain of existence. Yemoja for the ocean, Shango for thunder and justice, Oshun for love and rivers. The Odu Ifa is the sacred body of knowledge, 256 volumes of oral literature. UNESCO recognized it as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity.
When Yoruba people were enslaved and taken across the Atlantic, Ifa traveled with them. It became Haitian Vodou, Cuban Santeria, Brazilian Candomblé, Trinidad Orisha. Your family may be practicing a version of Ifa right now and not know it.
Vodum from Dahomey, the primary creative force is feminine, a profound reverence for ancestors. The philosophical core includes equanimity in the face of adversity. That framework, carried by enslaved Dahomean people, was a foundational element of the Haitian Revolution of 1791, the only successful slave revolution in recorded history. The Bois Caiman ceremony that initiated the revolution was a Vodum ceremony.
The only successful slave revolution in history was launched at a spiritual ceremony. The religion they were trying to erase was the thing that freed them.
The Akan of Ghana had Nyame, the supreme creator, and a concept of the soul with three distinct parts. The Okra, your divine spark from God. The Sumsum, your personality developed through experience. And the Ntoro, the spiritual essence inherited from your father. And the Adinkra symbols, over 100 visual symbols, each encoding a philosophical concept. Theology you can see and wear.
The pattern across all traditions is consistent. A supreme transcendent creator, ancestor veneration as a central practice, the natural world as sacred, a complete ethical framework rooted in spiritual law, and no institutional separation between the spiritual and the everyday. These are not independent inventions. They reflect a shared West African theological intelligence, developed over thousands of years.
The missionaries showed up calling these people godless pagans. But everywhere they went, Africans already had God, already had ethics, already had a theology of the soul. They didn't lack God. They lacked Europeans' ability to recognize what was standing right in front of them. Now we have to talk about what happened. Not about blame, about accuracy, about understanding exactly what was done, how it was done, and why it worked so well.
The Portuguese arrived at the Niger coast in 1434. Systematic colonial missionary activity in West Africa intensified through the 18th and 19th centuries. British formal colonization of Nigeria was established in 1914. The destruction of West African spiritual systems was not incidental to colonization. It was a documented objective of the colonial project.
6 tools, working together. Let's go through them. Tool 1. Military force. Traditional religious leaders were labeled the devil's agents. Shrines were physically destroyed, priests imprisoned or killed. In Igbo land, the Long Juju at Chukwu, one of the most powerful spiritual centers in all of Igbo land, was destroyed by British forces in 1902.
The Long Juju was not solely a religious institution. It functioned as a center of trade, diplomacy, and legal adjudication across the eastern Niger Delta. Its destruction simultaneously eliminated a spiritual center and an entire system of governance and commerce.
They didn't just destroy a temple, they destroyed an infrastructure. Tool 2, the slave trade. Before missionaries could convert you, the slave trade had to break you. Between the 15th and 19th centuries, an estimated 12 million Africans were forcibly removed from the continent. Communities stable for thousands of years were suddenly in chaos. Families separated, leaders corrupted.
Oral tradition requires intergenerational proximity. Elders must be present to transmit knowledge to children. A community under sustained destabilization through forced removal cannot maintain the conditions necessary for cultural transmission. The slave trade functionally pre-destroyed the infrastructure of African spiritual tradition before missionaries arrived to replace it.
Tool 3. Mission schools. The most effective long game. Take the children, remove them from their families and elders. Give them European names. Teach them in English. Teach them that everything their parents believe is demonic. Reward compliance. Punish connection to tradition.
The mechanism is precise. Oral tradition transmits through proximity and repetition between elder and child. Mission schools severed that proximity systematically. One generation educated away from their elders is sufficient to break the chain of transmission. The knowledge does not die because it is disproven. It dies because there are no longer children positioned to receive it.
Tool 4, legal bans. Colonial governments made indigenous spiritual practice illegal. Drums banned from churches and schools across West Africa. Ceremonies criminalized. Priests imprisoned. Why the drums specifically? Because drums were the nervous system of the spiritual community. Every ceremony moved to the rhythm of the drum. You silence the drums, you silence the tradition.
In some colonial American territories, enslaved Africans faced legal penalties for drum ownership. The stated rationale was preventing coded communication. The actual effect was the suppression of cultural and spiritual practice. The drum ban was not religious policy. It was information control.
Tool 5. Psychological warfare. This is the one that did the deepest damage. Not just saying your practices are wrong, saying your skin is cursed, your ancestors are in hell, your culture is evidence of your inferiority. If you accept those lies deeply enough, you don't just abandon your practices, you become ashamed of them.
The psychological mechanism is documented. When a population internalizes the belief that their cultural identity is morally inferior, they begin to transmit that belief to their children independently of external enforcement. This is the most efficient form of cultural suppression, self-perpetuating, requiring no ongoing external force.
They weaponized love. Parents stopped teaching not because they were forced to, because they believed it would harm their children. That is the deepest wound in this entire story.
Tool 6. Economic control. The colonial economy rewarded conversion. Mission church attendance opened access to education. Education opened access to employment. Baptism was not just a spiritual choice, it became a survival strategy.
Economic coercion is among the most effective conversion mechanisms because it does not require belief. It requires compliance. And compliance, sustained across generations, eventually produces belief. The economic structure of colonialism made Christianity the rational choice for survival. That is not faith. That is engineering.
And who can blame the people who made that choice? They were trying to survive. They were trying to protect their children. The anger does not belong with them.
The final stage, and then the cruelest development of all. Eventually, Africans who had been genuinely, sincerely converted began to do the work themselves. Parents who believed with all their hearts stopped teaching the old ways to their children, not out of cowardice, out of love.
This is the terminal stage of successful cultural destruction. External enforcement is no longer necessary. The target population has internalized the framework completely and becomes the agent of its own continued erasure. The system has achieved self-perpetuation.
And that is the wound that is still healing. Right now, in this generation, in families all over the diaspora. I want you to hold two things at once. The first thing, what was taken was real. 8,000 years of accumulated wisdom, an understanding of the divine, built from the ground up by people who were paying attention to the earth, to the sky, to each other, to the generations before them. A philosophy of the soul, a theology of sacred impermanence, a legal system rooted in ecological ethics, extraordinary art, a kingdom that rejected slavery and ruled through the authority of the Spirit. That was taken systematically over centuries by people who convinced themselves they were doing God's work.
The second thing, it did not disappear completely. You cannot fully destroy what lives in the body. Vodun survived the Middle Passage encoded in the memory and movement of enslaved people. Ifa became Santeria, Candomblé, Louisiana Voodoo. The rhythm patterns, the call and response, the ancestor veneration, the feeling in Black American church services that something older than Christianity is moving. All of that is a survival.
Fragments of something ancient, wearing new clothes, speaking new names, but still there, still beating with the same original heartbeat.
And something is happening in this generation. All over the diaspora, people are returning to Ifa, to Odinani, to Akan tradition, to Vodun, not to abandon what they have built, but to reclaim what was taken, to restore the chain.
Sankofa. Go back and fetch it. It is not wrong to go back for what you forgot.
I have been processing the material we covered today. The Mbari houses particularly, a community that built something extraordinary and then surrendered it completely. No preservation, no legacy, pure offering. I am not certain I have the correct framework to evaluate what that means, but I find that I want to.
Luma.
That is all I have.
That is enough. Your ancestors had something extraordinary, something built with extraordinary care over extraordinary time. What was done to it was not salvation. It was not civilization. It was theft. And the recovery from that theft begins here, with knowing, with being willing to say out loud, we had something and it was taken, and we are going to learn what it was. If this video changed something in you, share it with somebody who needs it. Drop in the comments which tradition hit you the hardest. I want to know your story. I'm Ada. This is Nwanyi, and we will see you next time.